And good morning, everyone. I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to talk to people about workplace bullying and in particular upward bullying. It's a passion of mine. And also thank you to the two Lauras for the invite. Don't worry, a copy of slides is going to be shared after this, so don't have feel like anybody has to sort of scribble away and make notes and things like that. So as Laura said, I've worked for the Ministry of Defence for over 20 years. My background is in HR, transformation, and project and programme management. Quite late in my career, I will say, I was given a couple of opportunities to start doing some academic learning to prepare me for the senior civil service. And what I've done is taken that opportunity to focus on HR issues. So as you can see, when I did my MBA, I looked at things like employee engagement and how that relates to anxiety and stress. I then looked at decision making within defence when I was then doing a MA with King's College, and now I'm currently looking at upwards bullying within the Ministry of Defence. But hopefully my findings will be transferable to a lot more organisations, so it won't just be MOD specific, because I'm looking at civil servants rather than military. So before we get too far in, a little bit of a quiz time. As Laura said, if you could scan the QR code or go to menti.com, please use the code and write one or two words of what comes to mind when someone mentions workplace bullying. So I'll give it a little bit more. So we can already see two words that are coming out quite strong. Yeah, so what we're seeing here is obviously most people think of workplace bullying as causing stress or being caused by stress. That's something we'll unpack as we go through. Harassment, which is interesting, and we'll cover that in a little bit more detail as we go through in regards to workplace bullying. And the fact that managers there, it'll be interesting to see if people were thinking about manager as the perpetrator or the victim. So if you leave that open as we go through, we'll have a couple more interactive elements, and it's all in the same area. You can't access it yet, but just leave that element open, so it just makes it easier in the next bit. But thank you very much, and hopefully nothing on the screen is, people don't feel like it was, there's any surprises in that. So my back, as I say, I work for MOD. What I have also done is I've set up my own company. I'm a sole trader, and basically my aim is to help small and medium enterprises to help them tackle workplace bullying. So, if anyone wants my services after this, feel free to reach out. So another little quick quiz. Do you think your internal policy and processes at the moment would recognise and support a manager experiencing upward bullying?
Sharon, I'll just make a comment. I think you may need to scan the code again. No, wait, I was wrong. Maybe it's just my phone. I'll be quiet. Sorry, guys.
So for me, what I'm finding this particularly interesting, not least because, half of you that have responded are saying no, that you don't think your policy and processes would help somebody going through upward bullying, with 30% saying don't know. That is 3/4 of you saying that. That is, quite significant when you think of it like that. So another quick one. Have you heard of upward bullying? So for me, that's quite good. I like, prior to my research, I must admit hadn't actually come across the phrase. I hadn't really thought about the fact that subordinates could bully a manager. So, the fact that over 50% of you have actually heard of it, actually fills me with, hope. And then the nutty question, have you experienced upward bullying? So we've got about over 1/4 of you are saying that you have experienced upward bullying. So as we progress through this, it might be useful to understand your experience, what worked, what didn't work, what support was there for you as we go through. So what is workplace bullying? I mean, most of you probably have come across this definition previously, but it's quite useful to just reinforce this. So ACAS define it as unwanted behaviour. It can be regular or a one-off. It can be face-to-face, and it's not always obvious or noticed by others. Interestingly, the definition does include the abuse or misuse of power that undermines, humiliates, or causes physical or emotional harm. That's quite important when we come to think about upward bullying. So what is harassment? So I'm sure you've also come across this. There is a definition of harassment under law, and that's where it differs from workplace bullying, because workplace bullying is not defined under law. The Equality Act says there's 3 types of harassments: against protected characteristics, sexual harassment, or less favourable treatment because of harassment. So it has to be against one of those 7 protected characteristics. So once again, a little bit of interactive section. So read the example on the screen, and then use the questionnaire, the PowerPoint thing, to say whether you think what the manager is doing is performance management, workplace bullying, or you don't know. Okay, so I think that's quite overwhelmingly people are saying that that is workplace bullying. So another scenario for you. You could just let me know whether you think that is performance management or workplace bullying. Okay, next one. So there's 5 of these scenarios, so we'll Won't take long. Okay, so on that one, overwhelmingly, people are saying that that's performance management. And that one, workplace bullying. And then the last one. Okay, all right. So, bit of background. Those 5 scenarios were all part of an official academic research that was taken over probably about a year. Lots of different people were asked the question. It had 500 participants. And what it found, the research found, that depending on who was viewing the scenario, depended on whether they thought it was performance management or workplace bullying. And what the academic researchers found was legitimate performance management was more likely to be perceived by employees as workplace bullying. So this is quite concerning when you're thinking as a line manager, if you're trying to manage somebody's performance, to help them, give them developmental opportunities. If they feel that that's workplace bullying, that's going to put you in quite a difficult situation. Of all of the scenarios, there was, I think, consensus across all of them, apart from the Josh one. And I can say that was actually a performance management. So I thought it was quite interesting that that was the only one that there wasn't any consensus. What this does show is the fact that when you're looking at any statistics, when you are looking at any returns or talking to staff with regards to workplace bullying, you have to be conscious of this different perception of people's activities. And this is a prime example. So every year within the civil service, we have an annual survey. It goes to all the major government departments. It's one of the biggest people surveys in the UK. It's open to over 5,000 employees. We on average get about 350,000 people that complete the return. And when it comes to the questions about bullying, 60% of those who reported they were being bullied, they said it was by their manager. 45 to 50% said they were being bullied by a colleague, and 5% said they were being bullied by a subordinate. Based on those scenarios you've just looked at and the research findings, one of the things to have a think about is this the true picture? Is it really 60% of staff being bullied by a manager? Is it really only 5% of staff being bullied by a subordinate? And these are things you've got to think about when you're developing your policies and your processes, because this is what the normal statistics are saying. This is what, if you look at any statistics with regards to workplace bullying, the majority would say that managers are bullying subordinates. But I believe that is not the full picture. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, and I'll be very clear on that. I am not saying that managers don't bully their staff, but what I am saying is sometimes that will not be the full picture, shall we say. So when you're looking at bullying versus harassment, the academic definition of bullying is this. It has to include negative acts, so that's your rumour, your gossip, hitting people, all that sort of thing. It has to have occurred over time. As you can see, it's normally 6 to 12 months. So that differs from the ACAS definition. So the ACAS says it can be a one-off. Well, the academic definition is no, it has to be over time. It has to be repeated acts, so it's got to be more than one act. And there has to be a real or perceived power imbalance. So that goes back to the statistics with regards to managers believing, being assumed as being the perpetrator for this. And then there also has to be an impact of the bullying, a negative impact. So, for example, if somebody is at the receiving some horrible comments, but actually it doesn't bother the individual, it's not classed as bullying, which is quite interesting. And all of this, as I've said, will have an impact on the statistics. What are we doing when we're gathering those statistics? What are we asking people? Have we defined what actually bullying is? So one of the things in my research, which I'm finding, is that particularly when you're looking at policies, there is definitely a focus on more overt activity. So things like verbal abuse, work-related harassment, so people not being allowed to take leave, etc., as opposed to providing examples of covert activity. And I think that is because, and this is what my research is trying to unpack and trying to find out if my assumptions are correct, I believe that is because a lot of the covert activity tends to come from the subordinates when you're looking at workplace bullying, because they don't have that formal power within any organizational structure. So they're using covert activity to get that perceived power. They're trying to, for example, if they do believe that their performance management is unfair and what their line manager is doing unfair, start a rumour, start gossiping about the line manager, and this will undermine them. So once again, I'm never saying that downward bullying doesn't happen, but what I'm saying is upward bullying does as well. And I think it happens a lot more than we think. So why is this of interest to you? So I will say this is one of the case studies that actually brought me into the research. With my HR background, I got involved in this case. This is a live case study. It's ongoing now. Basically, a manager within the civil service, within the Ministry of Defence, got promoted, moved into a brand new role in September 21. As part of the handover, she was given background on the staff within her team, including things like somebody had just had a recent bereavement, etc. But also she was given some background on the fact that they had an underperforming member of staff within the team and had been for about 18 months. And there'd been some conduct issues. So the manager decided not to do anything immediately on the back of that information, wanted to observe it for themselves, which I would say is good practice. They did start observing some disturbing behaviour. I won't go into the details, but they got HR advice, spoke to our business partners, spoke to our casework team, and they issued an informal warning to the individual. The individual had also been given a piece of work with a deadline. What was delivered was not up to the standard that was expected of that grade. So in December 21, a formal warning for poor performance was issued, and the individual was given lots of time with the line manager and other members of the team to support them, to get them up to the standard they needed. They were given bounded activity to help them build up their skills, etc. You know, so this person was given a lot of help. In January 2022, the new manager was informed by a former colleague, this person actually no longer worked for the Ministry of Defence, that the member of staff was sending defamatory messages to all and sundry, and they had received it, and it was I've seen it, it is quite inflammatory. So the manager submitted a formal complaint against the individual. She talked to a couple of other people and found out, yes, this is what this member of staff had been saying about them. They had also said that they would get the manager. Unbeknownst to the manager, the employee had submitted a formal complaint of bullying. I will say there was no grounds for this. I have my personal opinion of why it was submitted by the individual. I think they were trying to derail the informal warnings because at the end of January, that was when his review point was going to be. And based on what he had been producing, he was about to probably move to the first stage of a formal warning. MOD, I will say, at the time did not take this very seriously. For whatever reason, it took them nearly 12 months to investigate it. And they got the complaint, the two individuals got the outcomes of their complaints in December 2022. By this point, the employee, the member of staff, had been moved sideways and promoted while he was being investigated for bullying. The two complaints weren't upheld. The manager was found to have just undertaken good line management activity for an underperforming member of staff. And basically her complaint, the deciding officer, it was the same for both cases, had decided that there wasn't enough evidence to believe that this individual had been defaming the manager. They both appealed in the January. That went a little bit quicker. The appeal outcome was in April 2023. Once again, the line manager was found to have done nothing but good line management, while the new deciding officer, a new appeal manager, basically found that the individual had been bullying, and a lot more, you know, based on the evidence. The case file was quite significant and there was lots of witness evidence and all the rest of it, which I don't understand why the December outcome was what it was. The individual was found guilty of bullying and harassment of the manager and was then referred for misconduct discipline. However, nothing was done. The employee then submitted an ET, making a lot more defamatory allegations against the manager. The manager has now gone off on long-term sick, and this is where I've come in because I'm trying to help the line manager through all of this. The employee has had their first preliminary hearing in court, which elements of their case was already thrown out. We're hoping the rest will thrown out again. In January, they had another preliminary hearing, and we expect the manager is now about to be going through the ill health retirement process based on all the stress and anxiety of all of this. And the employee's final hearing for the employment tribunal is not due until January 25. So this is not going to go away until then. We've looked at the case file. I don't actually believe this individual's got a case. So what is the so what about this? So the lesson I think you should all take away from this is do not ignore poor behaviour or fail to act. It will have such a detrimental impact on your organisation, not just with the individuals involved in the bullying, but the wider team. Between the September and the December 2022, the team that was involved and being interviewed as witnesses, etc., became really unproductive just because of the negativity around all of what was going on, what was being said by this individual. It was just a really horrible environment from what I can understand. So it affected that team. The individual, as I say, was moved sideways and promoted. He has continued his behaviour where he is. His line manager where he is has now gone off sick. They were completely oblivious of all of this going on because of we can't share these details, but he has started that in the new team. As I say, the line manager's gone off with sick leave, and basically he had, in my belief, this individual has not actually been productive in probably about 3 years. So we're paying someone quite a lot of money who hasn't actually produced any work. Two of the individuals involved, so witnesses and things like that, have left the department because they just couldn't deal with it anymore. The organisation is being taken to UT, as I say, so there's the cost to the department for that, the legal fees, the time of people having to put the packs together, etc. And because it all got so messy and was handled so badly right from the start, in the fact that the initial investigation took 12 months, it sort of froze everything, so nobody could do anything about the actual case. So my takeaway for everyone is this is quite an extreme example. However, it's a good example as you can't ignore when you're dealing with poor performance for a member of staff. It won't go away. You're just passing the problem on to somebody else. And in some cases, it gets worse. So my starting to look into upward bullying and my research findings, as I say, I found issues around self-reporting. I found, so the fact that the definition that is provided to line managers, well, all staff with regards to filling in surveys and things like that, doesn't tend to resonate with line managers. There is also a playground connotation of bullying, workplace bullying. So managers sometimes don't want to report it because it might make them come across as feeling like they're failing in some way. And my research has also found that when managers do report it to HR, like in the case I just showed you, the response they got back was, well, you're the manager, surely you can deal with it. You're in the position of power, why can't you deal with this? One of the other issues is the delegation of responsibilities. I don't know about your organisations, but within the Ministry of Defence, most HR functions like recruitment, performance management, reward and recognition, firing, etc., is all now done by a line manager, not a HR professional. And obviously that comes with its own complications, not least because the line managers tend to have other jobs, their main job, so can't spend the time on this. But there are some people that are just not good at this. Also, policies and processes. I mean, you answered that the questions earlier. 50% of you said you don't think your policy or process would recognise upward bullying, with up to 75% of you saying you don't know. And we've also covered the covert versus overt. How does it present itself? So when you are looking at upward bullying, a lot of research is focused on managers, as I've said, bullying staff. And I think I don't have the proof, but when I dug into the case file and the live case, when I was trying to support and provide HR advice, I think there was an inherent bias within the team that was doing the investigation, etc., that the line manager must have done something to trigger all of this, rather than it all being just because the member of staff didn't like being managed. So previous research looking at upward bullying basically asked line managers to answer whether they've been bullied based on just purely a definition. 9% said that they had. When given some examples of what upward bullying could look like, this rose to 24%. So that's quite interesting itself. So that's something to think about when you're writing your policies. So looking at the perpetrators, I've already covered the fact that a lot of it is triggered by performance management, and then the misuse of the grievance process. However, there is also other factors to be taken into account. This is not a simple issue that's going to have one quick fix. That, you know, life is not like that. The other issue I have come across is the fact of trade unions. We don't have as much strength in our trade unions as we used to. So there has been a decline. So that has meant that there has been less collective bargaining. I mean, I know we have had some activity in the last couple of years with some, the strikes, etc. But on a whole, since the 1970s, trade unions membership has fallen drastically. What this means is when a member of staff is unhappy or they are experiencing job changes because of transformations within an organisation, or their new role is not defined very well, or their line management is all a bit messy, they don't have anyone to turn to for support or help. They don't have a trade union, so they can feel impotent, and what they might do is then lash out at the person they feel is responsible, and that is usually the line manager. So that doesn't come from the same place as the performance management or, you know, misuse of the grievance process. So you just need to think about that when you're changing people's roles or changing people's jobs. They need to feel secure. They need to understand why things are happening. The other element is otherness. So I'm sure people won't be particularly surprised by this, but when you are the first of a group into a new organisation, there might be some tensions. So, for example, as I say, I've worked for the Ministry of Defence for over 25 years. I'm female, civil servant. I have worked in teams which have been predominantly, well, completely male military, and I was the only civilian female. And, you know, that came with issues, lots of different issues, but thankfully, I wasn't actually bullied in those cases. But people are, because they don't fit in with a norm for whatever reason. They, you know, they are either targeted until they fit in or targeted until they leave. So that's another thing to be careful of. If you've got somebody who different background, because it doesn't have to be race, it doesn't have to be sex or disability or something. It can be something from somebody having a different accent to the team that they're going into, or come from a different background. You know, you've just got to make sure you support your staff. And then there is also the dark triad. So there's been lots of research into the dark triad. So that includes narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. When looking at upward bullying in particular, narcissism is the one that comes through. So that is somebody who has an inflated view of themselves, don't have any empathy, don't understand the impact on the wider team. I mean, I'm not a psychologist, but the individual in that live case study, I think, has an element of narcissism. They really didn't understand the impact of them not hitting deadlines, not producing the work. They didn't understand that somebody else from the team would have to step up and, you know, rush through and try and meet the deadlines, etc. And had a very high inflated view of their self. I mean, there was messages from him to people saying, I don't understand why I've got this warning. I'm brilliant. So I do think this individual was a narcissist. And then the last thing is surveys. As I won't go into this too much, but the fact that, are you asking the manager of the staff a definition or a description? and the whole thing of lack of recognition and lack of support. So once again, as line managers, or as managers, why should you care? So employment tribunals which cite bullying are up 44%. So I think, I mean, that could be junior staff reporting downward bullying, or it could be managers reporting upward bullying. But regardless, bullying figures within ETs is up 44%. It's a hidden problem. I think most organisations, all organisations, have a moral and ethical responsibility to help their staff and try and prevent workplace bullying, and also you have a legal responsibility. The cost, I mean, to individuals, it can be physically, mentally, and financially negative for individuals. My research has found that managers who have been accused of being a bully, upward bullying, or being accused of downward bullying, should I say, and then subsequently found it was an unfounded case, they've never recovered. They've ended up having to leave the organisation. With society, there is a cost to society in the fact that, you know, the mental health side of things, the physical side of things for people that are impacted by bullying, it puts more pressure on our medical services. And then obviously with an organisation, you have loss of productivity, you have to replace individuals, so you've got recruitment cost, you've got employment tribunals, and potentially personal injury claims. So what can you do? So one of the things I was asked to do today was talk about what people should do to put in their bullying policy. And I would say, actually, that's sort of down the line. You need to start at the beginning. When you advertise a post, you've got to be clear what their roles and responsibilities that individual is. You have to be clear what the management chain is. You have to be clear who's doing the tasking, and you have to undertake a proper induction with that individual. Once you've got that groundwork in place, there then is things you can do to try and prevent workplace bullying. Training. So this doesn't just mean training on your job and things like that, but also training on what we actually mean by the behaviours that we want. What will happen if you perform well? You know, what is your reward and recognition program? What happens if you don't work well? You know, what is the discipline process if somebody does? And also making sure that that's not just managers, but employees as well. Then I think there needs to be a focus on performance management. So once again, very clear what objectives are meant to be achieved and what are the behaviours you're expecting from staff. So I refer to this as the what and the how. So I could say to a member of staff, I want them to complete a piece of work by the Friday, and it's really, really important. And they achieve the objective. They complete it by Friday. However, in completing that, they've managed to upset 10 other people and get it done. So it didn't come with the behaviours I needed as well. So it's marrying those two together when you're looking at staff on their performance management and making sure people know what is expected of them. So the policies you need, as I say, you need to have clear performance management. Now, this is the thing I would emphasise quite strongly. I believe you should have a separate bullying policy to a harassment policy. The reason being is, as I've said at the beginning, bullying is not defined under law. And what I am finding when I'm reading company bullying policies is there'll be sort of like a throwaway mention of bullying, and then it will go into harassment and mentions the law, etc. I think that my personal belief is that then gives staff the belief that they can't report bullying if it doesn't fall under harassment criteria. So I think good practice is to separate them. They don't have to be in two separate policies, but make sure they are very clearly two different things. And then also have a look at your grievance policy and make sure that it's quite clear of what the discipline, the outcomes might be, and if there's misconduct. The other thing is then there's no point just having policies. You've got to do something about them. So you've got to be good with your investigations. They've got to be independent, or I'd recommend they are independent if you can afford it, prompt and thorough. Going back to that case study, 12 months to undertake that investigation was, shocking. It was stressful for everyone involved. There was actually looking over the case file. There was no real reason why it had taken that long. It was just badly managed. And the other thing is transparency. Make sure your communications are clear, going back to what is expected of your staff. But also, I think it's useful to have a dashboard of this sort of thing. I'm not saying you release names, I would never recommend that. But what you could say is we've had 10 bullying cases this month, 2 are downward, 4 are upward, and the outcomes are this and this. This is telling your staff that you deal with it. You're serious about it. And also you could present lessons identified. Because of X case, we are now changing our policy. That sort of thing. You need to know your statistics. Where are your hotspots? Where is the bullying happening? Who is bullying who? And then, as I say, there is no point just having a policy. You have to review it. You have to go back and check it's working of all of this, and go back to the beginning and change it back at the beginning and follow this through.